What if I told you that in the wealthiest homes of the Gilded Age, the word mother was often spoken with respect but without warmth? In the vast mansions of New York and London, amid marble, velvet, and gold, a quiet drama unfolded that was not spoken of in polite society. Women in silk and diamonds gave birth to heirs, but the real mothers to these children were those who wore simple, starched aprons. This is a story of love that was bought for a salary, but became more sincere than any blood ties, binding servants and children with invisible threads. We will immerse ourselves in a world where emotional intimacy was a luxury available only on the upper floors, in children's rooms, where the owners of the house rarely looked. You will see how hired workers gave their hearts to other people's children, knowing that one day they would simply be shown the door. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how a simple nanny could become a whole world for a child, and why parting with her became a tragedy that broke the destinies of future millionaires. What if I told you that everything you believed about family values in the past was not true? In an era when the external facade of the family was more important than its internal content, true affection was formed not in living rooms, but in modest children's rooms. The nanny came to the house as a hired worker, but very quickly took the place that rightfully belonged to the mother. For a child from high society, the mother was a beautiful but distant vision, smelling of expensive perfume and the cold of the street. She would appear in the evening to say goodnight, dressed in a ball gown that was too precious to touch. The nanny, on the other hand, was always there. Her hands were warm, her voice was soothing, and her scent was associated with safety and comfort. It was the nanny, not the mother, who knew all the child's fears, his little secrets, his favorite toys, and the reasons for his nighttime tears. She taught him his first words, held his hand when he was sick, and told him stories that he would remember for the rest of his life. This woman became the only source of unconditional love in a world where all other relationships were based on duty and etiquette. Mothers often saw their children only on a schedule, perceiving them as dolls to be shown off to guests. The nanny, on the other hand, saw in the child a living soul that needed attention, affection, and understanding, not just manners. This emotional substitution was imperceptible to the parents, but it was perfectly obvious to the child. At some point, the maid became a deity for the little person, on whom his well-being and mental balance depended. She was a protector from his strict father, from the frightening darkness of the corridors, and from the cold indifference of the big house. The child instinctively gravitated toward those who gave him warmth, without understanding class differences and hierarchy. The paradox was that the parents paid this woman money to love their children instead of them. They bought care and attention, freeing themselves up for social life, visits, and travel. But they could not buy the sincere affection that was born in response to this daily, hourly care. The nanny understood that this child was not hers, but her heart did not obey contracts and employment rules. She invested all her unspent tenderness in her charge, often sacrificing the opportunity to have a family of her own. It was a quiet, inconspicuous service that required enormous mental strength and self-denial. Society at that time considered this state of affairs to be absolutely normal and even appropriate for the aristocracy. No one thought about the price the child paid for this substitution of concepts and figures of affection. It was believed that a good upbringing was more important than a mother's embrace, and discipline was more important than emotional closeness. But it was in these nurseries cut off from the formal part of the house that the true personalities of that era were formed. It was ordinary women from the people who laid the foundations of humanity and compassion in the future lords and magnates. Without their warmth, these children would have grown up as cold and detached as their parents. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. What do you think about this system of upbringing where love was delegated to hired staff? Write about it in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Guess how long it took to create an insurmountable gap between parents and children? The architecture of Gilded Age mansions was designed to separate the worlds of adults and children as much as possible. Children's rooms were traditionally located on the top floor, often in the attic or a separate wing, where sounds from the formal halls rarely reached. This upper world lived by its own laws, schedule, and even climatic conditions. It could be colder here in winter than in the living room, and more stuffy in summer, But this was where real life took place. The staircase leading down was a boundary for the child, beyond which lay a territory of strict rules and strangers. The journey from the nursery to the mother's boudoir could take several minutes of walking along long corridors and staircases. This physical distance symbolized the emotional distance that existed in wealthy families of that time. A child could not simply run to his mother when he was sad or scared. A visit to their parents was an event that had to be prepared for, like going out into society with washing hands and changing clothes. This killed any spontaneity and turned communication with the family into a formal ritual. The nursery, on the other hand, was a place where children could be themselves, where they did not have to keep their backs perfectly straight. The nanny was the absolute ruler of this isolated kingdom under the roof of a huge mansion. She decided when to play, when to sleep, what to eat for lunch, and what book to read before bed. For the child, she was the center of the universe, and his parents were just distant rulers living somewhere downstairs. This enclosed space had a special atmosphere of comfort, contrasting with the pompous luxury of the lower floors. It smelled of dried herbs, warm milk, and starched linen, rather than wax and heavy curtains. It was an island of safety in an ocean of cold marble and gilding. The windows of the nursery often overlooked the courtyard or garden, creating a sense of a separate, protected world. The child could spend hours watching the life of the street or garden, discussing what they saw only with their nanny. These conversations by the window became the most intimate moments of emotional closeness. The isolation of the nursery had another side. Children often felt forgotten and unwanted by their parents. The silence of the upper floor was sometimes oppressive, reminding them that fun in life were happening somewhere far below. Only the presence of the nanny saved them from the corrosive feeling of childhood loneliness. The servants who came up to the nursery with food or coal were the only link to the wider world of the mansion. Through them, the children learned the news, gossip, and moods that prevailed in their parents' part of the house. But even these visits could not fill the void left by the lack of parental attention. In the next chapter, you will learn how a simple item of clothing could become a symbol of love, and a luxurious dress a symbol of alienation. Why do you think parents were so eager to separate themselves from their own children? Are you ready for the shocking truth about who the children of that era really remembered? The child's tactile sensations were inextricably linked to the texture of the clothing and the warmth of the body of the woman who was nearby. It was not the silk of the mother's dress that was preserved in memory, but the coarse wool of the nanny's dress and the stiffness of the starched apron. When a child fell and scraped their knee, they buried their face in that very white apron, smelling of soap and iron. These hugs were strong, reliable, and gave an instant feeling of protection from any pain. His mother, however, squeezed into a corset and lace, was physically unable to hold her child so close, afraid of creasing her expensive dress. His mother's touches were rare, cautious, and often done with gloves on, as if creating a barrier. The kiss on his forehead before bedtime was a dry and fleeting touch of lips barely touching his skin. The nanny bathed the child, rubbed him with a towel, combed his hair, and her hands knew every inch of his body. It was the maid's hands that fastened the endless buttons, tied the shoelaces, and straightened the blankets that had become tangled during the night. Those hands may have been rough from work, but to the child, they were the most gentle in the world. They had the strength to lift him up and the softness needed to wipe away his tears. The nanny's scent became for the child the scent of home, the scent of peace and security. It was a mixture of the scent of a clean body, lavender, which was put in the laundry, and sometimes sweet dough. His mother's scent was a complex aroma of expensive French perfume, which was delightful but seemed foreign. Children often fell asleep holding the edge of their nanny's clothes or squeezing her hand in their palm. This physical contact was vital for the formation of a sense of security and basic trust in the world. Deprived of this contact with their parents, children eagerly absorbed the warmth given to them by hired women. Even the visual image of the closest person was associated with a maid's uniform, not fashionable clothes, a cap, a strict collar, gathered hair. This image was forever etched in the children's memory. It was associated with constancy and reliability, while the images of their mothers were constantly changing. The nanny was not afraid to get dirty playing with the child on the floor or wet sailing boats in a puddle. She was lively, real, available for touch and hugs at any moment. The mother, on the other hand, was more like a beautiful statue that could only be admired from a distance. This tactile closeness created a bond that could not be broken by any orders or conventions. The child's body remembered the nanny's warmth even decades later, when he himself became an adult. It was a memory of the skin, a memory of the heart, which remained with a person until the end of their days. Don't forget to like this video if you are moved by the theme of forgotten love and devotion. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories about the hidden sides of the past. Guess what happened next when the lights went out in the house and deep night fell? It was during these hours when the mansion fell asleep that the true nature of the relationship between the nanny and the child was revealed. While the parents were shining at balls or sleeping in their chambers, the nanny kept her constant watch over the child's crib. Nightmares, fear of the dark, sudden fever, or stomach ache. The child turned to the one who slept in the next room for help with all of these things. The nanny woke up instantly at the first sob, accustomed to sleeping with a sensitive, anxious sleep. She came in the dark, lit a candle, and sat nearby until the child's breathing became even. These were hours of special trust, when the world narrowed to a spot of light from a single candle. In the silence of the night, the most secret stories were told, prayers were whispered, and promises were made that the parents did not know about. The nanny was the only protector from the shadows of the night, both real and imagined. When a child was sick, it was the nanny who spent sleepless nights at their bedside, changing compresses and giving medicine. She knew how to reduce fever, how to calm a cough, and how to persuade a child to drink bitter medicine. Parents could drop in the morning, find out about their child's health, and leave. But it was the maid who fought the battle against illness. Her fatigue was not taken into account because she had to be alert and collected the next day. No one asked if she had slept at all or how she felt after a night on duty. It was seen as part of her duties, paid for by her salary, but in reality, it was an act of love. Often, the nanny was the only witness to how the child grew, changed, and matured in her sleep. She adjusted the blanket with a tenderness that could not be imitated or faked. In those moments, she felt that this child belonged to her more than anyone else. She knew her charge's sleeping habits, who slept curled up in a ball and who sprawled out like a star. She knew which toy to put under their arms so they would sleep soundly and peacefully. These little things made up the fabric of their shared life, hidden from prying eyes. It was at night, when social masks were discarded, that the depth of their emotional connection became apparent. When a child woke up from a thunderstorm, he did not run to his parents' bedroom, but to the nanny's room. And there he always found refuge, warmth, and words of comfort that dispelled his fear. For many female servants, these children became the meaning of their lives, filling the void of their own loneliness. They gave their nights and days to other people's heirs, receiving only childish affection in return. It was a silent agreement between two hearts that needed each other. In the next chapter, you will learn about the painful rituals that children had to go through to please their parents. The daily ritual of meeting with the mother was a real test for the child and the nanny, similar to an exam. At a certain hour, usually before tea or before the parents left, the child had to be presented to the mother. The nanny carefully washed, combed, and dressed her charge in formal, often uncomfortable clothes. Every fold in the dress or suit had to be perfect. Every curl had to be in place. The nanny was just as nervous as the child because the untidy appearance of her charge could be interpreted as her negligence. She examined him critically, adjusting his collar and brushing off invisible specks of dust. Then came the descent down the stairs to the lower world, where completely different rules of behavior prevailed. The child had to enter the living room, bow or curtsy, and greet everyone politely. At that moment, he ceased to be just a child and became a little adult playing his role. If the child behaved well, they could be rewarded with candy or a fleeting smile, which was considered the highest reward. If they were capricious or in a bad mood, the visit was quickly cut short and they were sent back upstairs. The mother did not want to bother with children's tears or bad moods. Returning to the nursery was a moment of great relief when he could finally take off his tight shoes. The child became himself again, shedding the mask of an obedient heir. He ran to the nanny to get the hugs he so desperately missed in the living room. This contrast between the cold solemnity of his mother's living room and the warm comfort of the nursery shaped his perception of the world. The child learned that he had to earn his parents' love through perfect behavior, but his nanny's love was given to him freely, without conditions or tests. However, these lessons in pretense were only part of the education that life in a gilded cage provided. What if I told you that everything you were taught by noble governesses was less important than the lessons of a simple nanny? The formal education of children from wealthy families was impeccable. Languages, music, etiquette. But the real lessons of humanity, morality, and relationships with people came from a woman who could barely read. The nanny passed on to the children her simple, folk wisdom based on kindness, patience, and hard work. She taught them to notice people whom their parents were accustomed to ignoring: maids, cooks, gardeners. She explained that rudeness toward a servant humiliates not the servant, but the master himself. The nanny was strict but fair, punishing lies, cruelty, or greed. Her punishments were understandable and were always followed by forgiveness and reconciliation. The children knew that they were being punished out of love so that they would become better people and not out of anger or irritation. The values instilled by the nanny often conflicted with the cynical values of high society. As they grew up, these children often felt like strangers in a world of intrigue and hypocrisy. The voice of conscience in their heads spoke with the intonations of their old nanny. This school of life was invisible to parents who considered servants to be second-class citizens. They had no idea that their heir's worldview was being shaped by a common woman. But it was precisely this influence that made their children people with big hearts. The nanny prepared them for a life in which not everything is measured by money and titles. She gave them an inner core that helped them withstand the storms of life to come. It was an inheritance that could not be spent or lost. In the next chapter, you will learn how cruelly this connection was severed when the child became too old for fairy tales. Do you think the children understood at that moment that they were losing their closest friend forever? The most frightening and inevitable moment in the life of a child and nanny was the day when childhood officially ended. For boys, this usually meant leaving for a boarding school, and for girls, it meant being placed under the care of a governess. At that moment, the nanny who had been their whole world for 10 years became unnecessary. The breakup often happened suddenly and cruelly, without long goodbyes or sentimental scenes. Parents believed that long farewells only upset the child, so the nanny could be dismissed literally in one day. She was told to pack her things and leave the house while the child was out for a walk or at school. She had no rights to the child she had raised, could not demand meetings or write letters. The social gap became insurmountable again, reminding her of her place. She was just a servant who had done her job, and now the contract was over. The children cried into their pillows at night, calling for their nanny, but their tears only irritated their parents. They were told to be strong and forget that woman. But it was impossible to forget the source of their love, and this longing was buried deep inside. Sometimes the nanny was allowed to stay in the house in another position, such as a seamstress or housekeeper. This was even more painful, to see her charge from afar, but not dare to hug him as before. The relationship changed, became formal, and this slowly killed the former closeness. This experience of first deep loss left a scar on the child's heart for the rest of his life. He learned that love can suddenly disappear, that attachment brings pain. This made many of them closed and cautious in expressing their feelings in the future. The tragedy was that both the child and the nanny were victims of a system that did not value human feelings. Their love was real, but it had no future in a world of rigid social constraints. It was a painful price to pay for growing up in a gilded cage. But even distance and prohibitions could not always sever this bond completely. Despite prohibitions and distance, the connection between the pupils and their nannies often lasted for years. The grown-up children, now young ladies and gentlemen, secretly wrote letters to their old nannies. These letters were full of warmth, memories, and details of their lives that they did not even share with their parents. Nannies, who often lived in poverty or worked for other families, treasured these letters as their greatest possession. They reread them hundreds of times, proud of their children's successes and worried about their failures. For a lonely, aging woman, these letters were the only proof that her life had not been lived in vain. These relationships caused jealousy and misunderstanding on the part of the parents. If they found out about them, they could not forgive the maid for retaining influence over their child even after many years. It was proof of their own failure as parents. For many old nannies, the successes of their charges replaced their own life achievements. They cut out newspaper clippings, collected photographs, and told their neighbors about their boy, who had become an important person. It was their quiet pride, their contribution to history. Letters often became the only archive of the true feelings of that era, hidden from official biographers. They contained the truth about what these great people were like at heart when they took off their masks. And this truth was kept in the old boxes of ordinary women. This epistolary connection was a thin thread linking two different worlds, two different social classes. It proved that humanity and love are stronger than any class prejudices, and this connection was only broken by the death of one of them. But sometimes this attachment became the cause of real family dramas and hidden conflicts. Mothers who observed their children's attachment to their nannies often experienced a painful feeling of jealousy. They saw their children's faces light up with joy at the sight of the maid and dim at their own appearance. It was painful to realize that you had bought your child happiness with money in which there was no place for you. This jealousy was mixed with feelings of guilt and helplessness in the face of the established system. The woman understood that she herself had given her child to the nanny, following the rules of society, but her heart protested. She wanted to be loved, but did not know how to bridge the gap that had arisen between her and her child. But the child would not calm down in his mother's arms. He cried and struggled, searching for familiar hands. And the mother had to retreat, swallowing her tears of humiliation and resentment. She understood that she had lost the battle for her child's heart to a simple, illiterate woman. This rivalry could last for years, poisoning the atmosphere in the house and family relationships. The nanny tried to be inconspicuous, not to provoke the mistress, but the child's love itself betrayed her. She was only guilty of giving what the biological mother could not give. In their old age, many mothers remained alone in their huge houses, while their children visited their old nannies. It was a cruel but fair outcome of a life lived according to the laws of the world, not the laws of love. The price for the distance was inevitable. This drama of two women who loved the same child was a typical story of that time. One had all the rights but no love, the other had love but no rights. And in the middle was the child, torn between duty and feeling. This situation clearly showed that titles and wealth do not guarantee the most important thing: family happiness. The generation that grew up in the Gilded Age was marked by the upbringing of these simple women. Many famous philanthropists, public figures, and reformers of that time received their first lessons in kindness in the nursery. Their social conscience was awakened by their nannies' stories about the lives of the poor and the injustices of the world. These second mothers remain nameless shadows in history, standing behind the backs of great men. Their names are not in textbooks, their portraits do not hang in galleries, but their contribution is enormous. They preserved the living souls of children whom the system was preparing to be cold and calculating heirs to empires. They taught their pupils to love, to empathize, and to remain human in all circumstances. This inner light, kindled in childhood, helped many to survive personal tragedies, wars, and social upheavals. It was the most valuable asset they took with them from their parents' homes. We must remember these women who sacrificed their lives for other people's children, those who did not have families of their own, but raised an entire generation, investing in it the best that was in their souls. Their quiet feat deserves respect and remembrance, no less than the deeds of politicians and military leaders. The story of the nannies is a story about the power of human affection, which sprouts through the asphalt of social prohibitions. It is a reminder that a real mother is not the one who gave birth, but the one who comforted, warmed, and understood. And that love cannot be bought, it can only be given or earned. These were the true heroines of their time, performing their daily acts of love without hope of reward. And perhaps it is thanks to them that our world has become a little kinder and more humane. The story of servants who raised children better than their own mothers is a poignant chronicle of loneliness and love existing side by side. We saw how the purest and most sincere feelings were born in golden cages, and how cruelly they were sometimes cut short. These women did not just do their job, they saved children's souls from the coldness of indifference. Do you think such a deep attachment between a nanny and a child is possible in the modern world? Or has it disappeared along with that era? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so that we can continue to reveal the secret pages of history to you.